Hey, it's Tom here and welcome back to the channel. So one of the most common questions that I get asked, and I actually get emails on this fairly frequently as well, is basically how do I go about continuing to learn as much as I can about investing and trying to improve myself as an investor. I work a full-time job, I run this YouTube channel, also try to dedicate some time to training for different sports and things as well. So I don't have a huge amount of time, frankly, to put into just learning about new companies or learning about investing in general. It's something I'd certainly like to do more of, but at the end of the day, there's only 24 hours available to me each and every day. So I do sometimes struggle with trying to get information kind of into my head, but one of the really easy ways to continue to be able to do that, which is quite efficient with when I'm driving somewhere or when I'm just working generally, is to be able to listen to podcasts. Podcasts have actually been a pretty massive component of me being able to develop an investment strategy and try and really test my ideas by getting different perspectives from different people. So probably coming up about 2 years ago, I made a video on this YouTube channel of my top 5, I think it was, podcasts at the time. I think that list is probably due for a little bit of updating. So in this video, I'm going to give you my top 7 podcasts, which should give you one for every single day of the week. And I hope this is sort of a useful reference for you to help develop your own investment philosophy. So let's get straight into it, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, so the first podcast that I'm going to mention here is Invested by Phil and Danielle Town. I think this was my top podcast in the previous video that I did, and that is completely unchanged today. A couple of years on, this is still my number one sort of investing podcast that I listen to religiously. Now, the story of this particular podcast is basically Phil Town is an investor who you've probably heard me mention a bunch of times on the channel before. Very much invests his money in kind of a Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger style. And this podcast was essentially set up so that Phil could teach his daughter, Danielle, how to invest in this way. He'd been trying to do that for years. Danielle had struggled to ever get much interest in the topic and really struggled to ever actually, consistently kind of chip away at trying to learn how to invest her own money. So they decided to put it out in podcast form, and I think 5 years on, this is kind of where the show is now at. So it's been a pretty cool show to follow along. It kind of started out right at the basics, which is where I'd kind of recommend most people go if they're just getting started as well. Right back at episode 1, gets started out with the basics and goes through Charlie Munger's sort of 4-point checklist of what to look for in a given investment, right through till today where Danielle is, challenging Phil on his points, and they have disagreements and butt heads on some stuff. And it's a really cool way to see someone grow as an investor, and also pick up things myself as I've continued to learn from other sources as well and develop kind of my own investment philosophy. So that's the first podcast. Highly recommend Invested by Phil and Danielle Town. Okay, so the second podcast I have is the Acquirers podcast. This one's getting a little bit more niche with focusing on value investing specifically, and this is a show that is run by Tobias, who is basically a quantitative style value investor. He's not necessarily looking to analyze individual companies in a huge amount of depth. Rather, he's running sort of statistical screens on how to find what he thinks are undervalued stocks. So this is a great show. There's basically 2 types of episodes that generally come up on this one. Firstly, there's Toby Carlisle interviewing a bunch of generally professional investors, and then there's a weekly show called Value After Hours, which, to be frank, is the one that I probably listen to most often. There's a weekly show, Value After Hours, which is where basically Toby Carlisle gets together with Bill Brewster and also Jake Taylor, and the trio basically come with a topic each week, go back and forth on those topics, and then answer questions from the audience, which is watching live as well. That is podcast number 2, the Acquirers podcast from Toby Carlisle, and especially the Value After Hours episodes if you're interested in that kind of weekly banter that trio have, which I certainly am. Okay, so the third podcast that I listen to pretty religiously is a show called The After Dinner Investor. Now, The After Dinner Investor is a show that is a kind of one-man band run by a guy called Jason Rothman. Jason is based in the US, and he's sort of an everyday investor. The name of the show comes from the fact that Jason works an everyday job. He then goes and has dinner, and he invests and does all his investing work after dinner, right? So that's kind of where the genesis of the show show comes from. And Jason is very much interested in a lot of the same investors that I follow personally. He's a big fan of Warren Buffett, Monish Prabrai, Guy Spear, all of that crew who have quite similar investing philosophies to the both of us. And Jason covers a wide range of topics to do with not only those investors, but also the individual companies that those investors put their money to work with. He does sort of individual company analysis episodes. He also runs the After Dinner Investor Fund, which essentially is a $50,000 portfolio that he's created, and he does regular updates on the performance of that portfolio, as well as any changes that he's making to those investments and some of the reasons why he might make adjustments around the edges to that portfolio. So highly recommend checking out Jason at the After Dinner Investor. Okay, so the next couple of shows are going to be a bit of a change of tack. These are actually going to be both New Zealand podcasts. So the first one I have to mention is It's No Secret, which is a fairly new podcast from Kat and Christine, who actually work at Kernel, which is like an index fund manager here in New Zealand as a day job. They've gone out and started their own podcast. And this is going to be a really good fit for anyone who's not perhaps so interested in the hardcore technical value stuff like I perhaps am a lot of times, but certainly for people who are interested in, everyday general personal finance questions. Is it worth it to start a business? Do you need to own a home to do well financially? Is financial comparison to others hurting you or helping you? Many of these kind of big high-level topics that really everyday people have oftentimes in their head, and that everyday people really have questions and concerns about when they first get into personal finance. They're also nice short episodes, typically about 20 to 30 minutes, so you can listen to them. Certainly I do on a drive to work or while I'm getting ready in the morning. So highly recommend that one, and that is a nice New Zealand example for you as well. And the second New Zealand example podcast that I want to give you, and again, I should say if you're not based in New Zealand, if you're an international viewer, both of these podcasts really are probably still going to be relevant. A lot of the episodes are New Zealand focused, but many of them are sort of more general and more global philosophies on personal finance and investing as well. So the next one I have is a show called The NZ Everyday Investor by Darcy Ungaro. Darcy is a registered financial advisor in his day job here in New Zealand, and he runs a podcast, as the title might suggest, focused at NZ everyday people. Mum and dad style investors who are basically trying to do as much as they can to try and get ahead, try and get out of the rat race, try and build some wealth. And he talks about a wide range of investment disciplines. Darcy certainly has a strong focus on real estate investing, which I find very interesting, but he also focuses on shares and even cryptocurrencies. So there's certainly a few things in there to kind of broaden your perspective. Darcy also has plenty of guests on the podcast as well, ranging from New Zealand politicians to professional investors to everyday investors to active investors and passive investors and tax experts and a whole wide range of people. So certainly worth following along with that one and checking any episodes out that may be of interest to you. Okay, so podcast number 6, and the second to last one that I want to share is a show called the Young Investors Podcast. Now, big shout out here to a couple of other YouTubers, that being Brandon over at the New Money YouTube channel and Hamish Hodder at the Hamish Hodder YouTube channel, because that is their podcast. They come together each and every week and talk about the latest investing news, as well as some of their thoughts and questions on said news and any other investing topics they may want to cover at the time. So both of those guys have very similar investing strategies to myself. They're also a pretty similar age to me, sort of mid-20s kind of age. So it's a pretty relatable kind of show for me, certainly, to listen to. I've actually been a guest on one of the episodes, which was fantastic as well. And they've been super consistent on putting out great podcast content. So that's one that I listen to every weekend. It typically comes out on a first thing kind of Saturday morning for me here in New Zealand. And that's sort of become as part of my weekend habit when I'm mowing the lawns or doing the dishes or whatever it might be around the house. So highly recommend checking that one out. That is one that I've been listening to right since episode 1, and I think they're well over 100 episodes in now, so certainly recommend checking that one out. Okay, and the final show that I want to mention, which has taught me plenty, is the Investors Podcast / We Study Billionaires. That's a show that is run typically by Preston Persh and Stig Brodersen. They've had a slight change in hosts recently, but they cover, again, a wide range of investing topics. Now, this show has pivoted a little bit, and there is actually quite a bit of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency content on there, which admittedly, I don't really listen to those episodes, I must say, quite as much as some of the others, but there are certainly some really cool episodes on there. They have some pretty high-profile guests. I know people like Joel Greenblatt and Monish Prabrai have been on the show before, amongst many other very well-known investors. They have largely a value investing focus, with the exception of sort of the recent pivot to some more cryptocurrency stuff. And they also have a few different kind of series running within that show. So, for example, they have a quarterly mastermind group where they have regular guests come onto the show and basically pitch different investment ideas, and the other people on that sort of mastermind panel will, I guess, challenge those ideas and try and come to a conclusion on whether or not that particular stock idea is really a good investment or not. So that's been a show I've been listening to for quite some time, and it's still certainly pretty high on my list. So that is the final investment podcast that I want to share with you. So there you have it. Those are 7 investing podcasts that I listen to pretty frequently, and those have really helped me to develop myself as an investor in a pretty time-efficient manner. I do a lot of driving just every day to work, or for travel, kind of for my job as well. So I can crank through quite a few podcast episodes, and that's been really useful to try and build up some more knowledge in this brain. So a couple last things I'll just quickly mention. I would be remiss not to do so in a video along these lines with mentioning my favorite podcasts. And that's that I am actually involved in a couple of other shows as well. So I have my own podcast, the Investing with Tom podcast. If you haven't seen that already, definitely go check that out. That's a new one I've started up in 2021, and I think we're about 10 episodes in now. So definitely go over and check that out and let me know what you think of that particular show. And I also have recently started a sort of collaboration channel with 4 other YouTubers called Punch Card Investing, which is a show where we do weekly live streams on a given topic and also answer any audience questions that are coming in. So there will be links to both of those down in the description below. Head over and subscribe to the YouTube channel for Punch Card Investing, and head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whichever podcast player you use for the Investing with Tom podcast. But that is it from me today. I do hope you enjoyed the video and you find some of these shows helpful. Certainly they have helped me quite a lot as well. So I hope they're able to do the exact same thing for you. But that's it from me today. If you enjoyed the video, please hit like and hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.